Hey everybody, I'm going to walk through the problems from the review before you take your quiz. So if you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask before, or you can answer them through this video, hopefully. For the first one, it was cosine squared x plus 5 cosine x minus 6 equals 0, and you're solving between 0 and 360. That's written very poorly, sorry. But all that tells you is that you're in degree mode. So when you are using your calculator, gg.gg/logancalc is the link for that. When you're using that calculator, you should be in degree mode up top. The big thing here is that you have a cosine squared and a cosine. So usually we try to just get the trig function on one side, the numbers in the other, and then solve for it. But here we can't do that because we're unable to combine these two because it's a squared and it's the first degree. Oh my gosh, Mindy. She's been quiet for 4 hours, I promise. Mindy, go away, dog. Jesus. Come on. Go. 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 Okay, I'm back, people. Sorry about that. I swear she's been quiet since this morning. The second I start a video, she freaks out. But anyways, where were we? Okay, so again, we can't combine this and this because one's squared and one is to the first power. So if this looked something, let's say instead of cosine we had x. So what if we had x squared plus 5x minus 6? How would you solve that? Well, you'd probably say, if it said equal to 0, I would factor it and then set each factor equal to 0. We can do the same thing, but instead of an x, just treat it as cosine. So what numbers, in other words, multiply to this and add to this? Hopefully you say x plus 6 and x minus 1. Well, it's the exact same thing with cosine now. So we're going to say, well, this is, instead of x and x, we're going to say, well, this is cosine of x plus 6, and this is cosine of x minus 1 equals 0. Let's start by setting this equal to 0. Cosine of x plus 6 equals 0. Minus 6 minus 6. Cosine of x equals negative 6. If you go to your calculator, gg.gg/logancalc again. To get cosine, or to get x by itself, we do an inverse cosine in degree mode, and it comes up with the inverse cosine of negative 6 as error. It says there's no solution here, and that makes sense because cosine is the x value on the unit circle. So as I go around here, x is left and right. What's the farthest left you go? Negative 1. I'm never going to get to negative 6, so that portion tells you no solution. Okay, now let's do the same thing for this one. We're going to say cosine of x minus 1 equals 0, plus 1 plus 1. Cosine of x equals 1. Basic algebra, that should be quick and easy, almost thoughtless for you. Get cosine by itself. To do that, we take the inverse cosine, we take the inverse cosine. Here we get x equals the inverse cosine of 1, which is 0. Inverse cosine of 1 is 0. And that makes sense again because if we're on the unit circle, what they're asking us is where is the cosine equal to 0? So where do I go right, where do I go right? One spot right here, which is at 0 degrees. So your answer for this one is 0 degrees. Okay, moving on to the second one. I got to make sure I have the right problem here. It's 6 tangent squared. 6 tangent squared x plus 2 equals 3. Okay, now the difference between the last problem and this one is now we only have a tangent squared. That's all we have. So we can get this by itself. We don't have to factor anything here. So if this was 6x squared plus 2 equals 3, you'd minus 2 minus 2. Then you divide by 6, then you take the square root. So we're going to do we're going to do the exact same thing as this, but instead of an x squared, we have a tangent squared x. So let's start by minus 2, cancel. 6 tangent squared x equals 1. Again, we're trying to get x by itself. What do we need to do next? Divide by 6. Tangent squared x equals 1 over 6. Now what we need to do is, I gotta make sure I'm doing the right problem here, people. Yes, I am, sorry. Okay, now what we need to do is take the square root of both sides. We gotta get rid of this square. When we do that, we get tangent of x equals plus or minus, that's very important here, the square root of 1 over the square root over 6. Now, why is that plus minus important? Because remember, tangent is positive here and here. Tangent is negative here and here. This plus minus now tells us that we want answers in 1, 2, 3, all 4 quadrants. The plus minus tells us, hey, we should have 4 final answers here. Now, before we go any further, what we need to do is simplify this. So I'm going to pull the fraction apart, plus or minus square root of 1 over the square root of 6. This is, square root of 1 is 1, so it's plus or minus 1 over the square root of 6. Now I can't have a fraction on bottom, so I'm going to say times the square root of 6 times the square root of 6. And we end up getting tangent of x equals 1 times the square root of 6 is the square root of 6 over square root of 6 times the square root of 6 is 6, and it's plus minus out front. Now you got to get x by itself. So we're going to take the inverse tangent of both sides, inverse tangent. They cancel. You're left with x equals the inverse tangent of the square root of 6 over 6. How the heck do you type that into your calculator? Okay, on the calculator that I supplied you to, you're going to hit, clear everything out with it, which is AC on the bottom. You're going to hit inverse tangent. You are going to hit the square root button. You're going to hit 6. Now you need to close your first parenthesis. You're going to hit divided by. Now you're going to hit 6 again. And you should get x equals 22.2. Now, that's one of your answers. Again, when we're going back over here, they say, hey, I want 4 answers. This gave us my answer in quadrant 1, but I need my answers in 2, 3, and 4. So what did we just find? We found what's called, again, the reference angle. So what that means is 22.4 is what I go up right here. I go up 22.4. It also means I go up 22.4 here. I go down 24.4 here. I go down 22.4 here. And what does a reference angle mean? Well, it's how far away from the x-axis. So this is 180. This is 360. So my quadrant 1 answer is right here. What about quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4? Well, for quadrant 2, I'll write in green for this one, I move back from 180. So I do 180 minus 22.4. 180 minus 22.4, I think you get 157.8. 157.8 is your answer in quadrant 2. That's this one right here. In quadrant 3, I move forward 22.4 from 180, so I'm going to do 180 plus 22.4. 180 plus 22.4 should get 202.4. Last but not least, I go from 360, I go backwards, so I'm going to do 360 minus 22.4, and you should get 337.8. So you have 4 answers here, 1 for each quadrant. Your 4 answers are the 4 that I blocked off right there. Okay. Here we go. On to number 18. I have pictures on my phone to see which ones I took, so let's take just a second. Okay, this is 4 times the sine squared of x minus 3 equals 0. Okay, so for this problem, we got to figure out, and again, we're still in degree mode, we got to get sine squared x by itself. So we're going to plus 3, 4 sine squared x equals 3. Now we need to divide by 4, divide by 4. You get sine squared x equals 3 over 4. Now we got to get rid of that squared, so we're going to take the square root. And again, when I do this, I'm going to get answers that are both positive and negative, because when you take a, when you take a square root, you get a positive and a negative answer. So I get sine of x equals plus or minus the square root of 3 over the square root of 4. But now we should know the square root of 4 is 2, so this is plus or minus square root of 3 over 2. Sine of x equals square root of 3 over 2. Last step. And again, before this plus minus, again, sine is positive. Sine is the y value, so it's positive above the x-axis, and it's negative here. Again, the plus or minus right here, this tells us, hey, I want answers in 1, 2, 3, 4. I want answers in all 4 quadrants. So now, in order to get x by itself, I got to take the inverse sine. Take the inverse sine of both sides. Should get x equals, and again, what buttons are you going to press? You're going to press, I'm not going to write this one out, so please listen carefully. Inverse sine. You're going to press the square root button. You're going to press 3. Close your parenthesis. Now divided by 2. And you should get x equals 60. And that makes sense, because if you look on your unit circle at 60 degrees, the sine, the y value, is square root of 3 over 2. So what does that tell us? Well, I have an answer here that's 60. I have an answer here that's 60. Here that's 60. And here that's 60. So, again, I'll have answers in 4 quadrants. In quadrant 1, quadrant 2. I should write this in Roman numerals so we're not confused. I'll have answers in quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. My answer in quadrant 1 is easy. It's 60 degrees. In quadrant 2, remember, I'm going backwards from 180. So I'll do 180 minus 60 is 120. In quadrant 3, I'm going forward 60, so I'm going to do 180 plus 60 is 240. Quadrant 4, I'm going back from 360. 360 minus 60 is 300 degrees. There are your 4 answers for number 3. Okay, next up, we have sine of x times the secant of x equals 3 times the secant of x. My hint for this problem was, hey, start by moving everything over to the right-hand side. So that's what we're going to do. This is one term, so I'm going to do minus sine x secant of x. Do the same thing from this side. Minus sine x secant of x. Those cancel. You get 0 equals 3 times the secant of x minus the sine of x secant of x. For this problem, it was also between 0 and 2 pi, which just told us, hey, make sure you're in radian mode. So we're in radians now, not degrees. Now, when we look at the right-hand side of this, all this tells us is, hey, we have a secant for both of these. So couldn't you just factor out a secant? For example, if you had 3x minus yx, what you would do is you'd factor out an x and make this x times 3 minus y. We're going to do the exact same thing, but now we're going to factor out a secant instead of an x. So I'm going to have the secant of x times 3 minus sine. And again, this is still equal to 0. Okay, now we got to set both of these equal to 0. Let's start with this one's probably easier. Let's do this one first. 3 minus the sine of x, I forgot to write an x right there, equals 0, plus sine of x, plus sine of x. 3 equals sine of x. To get x by itself, take the inverse sine, make sure you're in radian mode. Cancel. X equals the inverse sine of x, inverse sine of 3, excuse me, inverse sine of 3, and you get no solution there. Okay, let's do the same thing, but now let's do it for secant of x. Secant of x equals 0. So really, what we can do is secant is the same as 1 over the cosine of x equals, well, I flipped this to be this, right? So 0, how do I flip 0 as a fraction? Well, 0, how do you make 0 into a fraction? Well, it's 0 over any number, right? I put an x there, but we could put 1, we could put 7, we could put 85 billion. It doesn't really matter what we put there, right? So let's put, I don't know, the 6. I just put a 6 here because 0 out of 6 is still equal to 0. You could put a 1, you could put a 3. You can put anything you want. It just doesn't matter as long as it's not 0. So 1 over the cosine of x equals 0 over 3. So this is still 0 over 3. Now, how do you get x by itself? Well, we could cross multiply. Boom, boom. 0 times the cosine of x equals 1 times 3 is 3. Okay, on the left-hand side, 0 times any number, well, that's just 0 equals 3. 0 equals 3. That's not true, is it? No, it's not. So that means our answer is no solution. We have no solution for either of these, and that's okay. That's why I gave you this problem. There's not going to be one like that on the quiz, which you'll see when you look at it. But I figured it was nice to show you that there are times when we have no solution for an answer. Okay, last up, number 23. We have, let me look at my phone to see the picture that I took. 4 sine squared x minus 3. 4 sine squared x minus 3 equals 0. And again, the directions tell us that we're still in radians. Okay, start by adding 3 plus 3 plus 3. 4 sine squared x equals 3. Divide by 4, divide by 4. Sine squared x equals 3 over 4. Okay, now we need to take the square root. Square root, we're getting x by itself. Sine of x equals plus or minus the square root of 3 over the square root of 4. So we have sine of x equals plus or minus square root of 3 over 2. Okay, now again, we're in radian mode, so you got to take the inverse sine. Take the inverse sine. Whoops. Take the inverse sine of both sides. Get x equals, on your calculator and do this in radian mode, you should get 1.05. But again, what this plus minus here tells me is, hey, we're dealing with sine. Sine is positive above the x-axis. It's negative down here. But the plus or minus tells us we want 1, 2, 3, 4 answers. So 1.05, where does that fall? Well, let's find out. This is pi. This is 2 pi. Pi equals 3.14. 2 pi equals 6.28. 1.05, not 1 pi. 1.05 falls here. That's my quadrant 1 answer. I want answers for quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. For quadrant 1, I said it was 1.05. For quadrant 2, I'm going back 1.05. So I'm going to do 3.14 minus 1.05. You should get 2.09. In quadrant 3, I'm still going 1.05. That's my reference angle, but now I'm going forward. So 3.14 plus 1.05 is 4.19. In quadrant 4, I am going backwards from 6.28. So 6.28 minus 1.05. I went back 1.05. You should get 5.23. So the answers I'm going to highlight in green, or highlight in black box, are 1.05, 2.09, 4.19, and 5.23. Those are your 4 answers. Hope this helps. If you have any questions, feel